Captain Sarah Mitchell stood at attention in the morning assembly, her uniform pressed to perfection, her boots polished to a mirror shine. The military base buzzed with its usual morning energy as soldiers prepared for another day of training and duty. Sarah had been stationed at Fort Henderson for 3 years now, and she knew the routine by heart. The sun cast long shadows across the parade ground as General Harrison made his way to the podium. He was a man known throughout the military for his strict discipline and unwavering dedication to protocol. His chest displayed numerous medals earned through decades of service, and his reputation preceded him wherever he went. Soldiers respected him, but they also feared him. Sarah watched as the general adjusted the microphone and cleared his throat. Behind him stood several other high-ranking officers, their faces stern and focused. The morning briefing was about to begin, and Sarah knew that today would be different from the others. Whispers had been circulating around the base for weeks about new orders that were coming down from headquarters. "Attention," bellowed Sergeant Major Rodriguez, and the entire assembly snapped to perfect military posture. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the distant sound of helicopters conducting training exercises. General Harrison began his address with the standard announcements about training schedules and base operations. Sarah listened carefully, as she always did, but her mind was troubled by something she had discovered the previous evening. While working late in the communications office, she had accidentally intercepted a classified transmission that revealed disturbing information about the mission they were being prepared for. The transmission detailed a planned operation that would involve targeting civilian areas in a foreign country, areas that intelligence reports clearly indicated were populated by innocent families, including children. The mission was being justified under the pretense of eliminating enemy combatants. But the evidence Sarah had seen suggested otherwise. The real motive appeared to be securing oil resources in the region. As the general continued his speech, Sarah felt her heart racing. She had spent her entire adult life serving her country with pride and honor. She had joined the military because she believed in protecting innocent people and defending freedom. The thought of participating in an operation that would harm civilians went against everything she stood for. Now, General Harrison continued, his voice carrying across the silent assembly, "I want to address the special mission that many of you will be participating in next month. Operation Desert Shield will be a critical component of our nation's strategic interests in the Middle East." Sarah's blood ran cold. This was it. This was the mission she had learned about in the intercepted transmission. She watched as the general outlined the official version of the operation, painting it as a necessary action to combat terrorism and protect American interests abroad. But Sarah knew the truth was far more complicated and morally questionable. The general's words seemed to echo in her mind as she stood there, surrounded by hundreds of her fellow soldiers. Many of them were young men and women who had joined the military with the same noble intentions that had motivated her. They trusted their leadership to guide them in honorable service to their country. But now Sarah faced an impossible choice. She thought about her family back home in Ohio. Her parents had been so proud when she graduated from the military academy. Her younger brother looked up to her as a hero. Her grandmother always told stories about how their grandfather had served in World War II, fighting against tyranny and oppression. What would they think if they knew what she was being asked to participate in? The general's voice grew more commanding as he continued. "This mission will require absolute dedication and unwavering obedience to orders. There can be no hesitation, no second-guessing of command decisions. The success of this operation depends on every soldier following orders without question." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. She looked around at the faces of her fellow soldiers, seeing determination and readiness in their expressions. They trusted their leaders completely, just as she once had. But trust, she realized, should not be blind. True loyalty sometimes meant questioning orders that violated fundamental principles of human decency. As the briefing continued, Sarah's mind raced through her options. She could remain silent, follow orders, and hope that somehow the mission would unfold differently than planned. She could try to work within the system, reporting her concerns through proper channels, though she knew that such reports often disappeared into bureaucratic oblivion. Or she could take a stand, knowing that it would likely end her military career and possibly result in serious legal consequences. The general began discussing the timeline for the mission, explaining that final preparations would begin immediately. Selected personnel would receive additional classified briefings in the coming days. Sarah knew that her specialized communications training made it likely that she would be among those chosen for the operation. "Before we conclude today's briefing," General Harrison announced, "I want every soldier here to demonstrate their commitment to this mission and to the chain of command. When I give the order, you will salute to show your readiness to serve without question." The moment had arrived sooner than Sarah had expected. She felt hundreds of eyes upon her as the general prepared to call for the salute. Her hands trembled slightly as she realized that this simple gesture would symbolize her acceptance of orders that she knew in her heart were wrong. The general raised his hand slowly, preparing to give the command. Sarah's mind flashed to images of the innocent families who would suffer if this mission proceeded as planned. She thought about the children whose lives hung in the balance, children who were no different from her own nieces and nephews back home. "Company, present arms," commanded the general. All around her, Sarah heard the crisp sound of hundreds of soldiers snapping their hands to their foreheads in perfect military salutes. The display of unity and discipline was impressive, a testament to the training and dedication of the men and women who served their country. But Sarah's hand remained at her side. The silence that followed seemed to stretch on forever. Sarah could feel every eye in the assembly turning toward her, could sense the shock and confusion rippling through the ranks. She stood perfectly straight, her jaw set with determination, her eyes fixed directly on General Harrison. The general's face darkened with anger and disbelief. In his decades of military service, he had never encountered such blatant insubordination in front of an entire assembly. The other officers behind him shifted uncomfortably, unsure of how to react to this unprecedented breach of military protocol. "Captain Mitchell," the general's voice cut through the silence like a blade, "you will salute immediately or face the consequences of your insubordination." Sarah took a deep breath, knowing that her next words would change everything. The weight of the moment pressed down upon her as she prepared to speak truth to power, regardless of the personal cost. She thought about all the innocent lives that hung in the balance, and she knew that she could not remain silent. Sarah looked directly into General Harrison's eyes, her voice steady and clear as she spoke words that would echo through the corridors of military history. "Sir, I cannot in good conscience salute an order that I know will result in the deaths of innocent civilians, including children." The gasp that rose from the assembled soldiers was audible across the entire parade ground. Never before had anyone witnessed such a direct challenge to military authority in such a public forum. Sergeants and corporals who had served for decades stood frozen in disbelief, their training telling them that this simply could not be happening. General Harrison's face turned red with rage. His decades of unquestioned authority had never been challenged so boldly, especially not by a junior officer in front of hundreds of witnesses. "Captain Mitchell, you are speaking out of turn about classified information. You will report to my office immediately for disciplinary action." But Sarah was not finished. She had crossed the line, and there was no going back now. "Sir, the information I possess indicates that Operation Desert Shield will target civilian areas under false pretenses. These are not enemy combatants we would be attacking, but innocent families whose only crime is living in an area rich with oil reserves that our government wants to control." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the distant sounds of helicopters seemed to fade away as Sarah's words sank into the minds of everyone present. Some soldiers began to shift uncomfortably, while others maintained their rigid posture, unsure of how to process what they were hearing. Colonel Martinez, who stood behind the general, stepped forward nervously. "Captain Mitchell, you are making serious accusations without proper evidence. You need to stop this immediately before you face charges of treason." Sarah reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a small recording device. "Colonel, I have evidence. Last night, while working in the communications center, I intercepted and recorded a transmission between General Harrison and Pentagon officials. The conversation clearly outlines the true nature of this mission." General Harrison's face went white. He knew exactly which transmission Sarah was referring to, and he understood the implications of its contents becoming public knowledge. That conversation had been conducted on what he believed was a secure channel, but apparently, security had been compromised. "You recorded classified communications without authorization," the general said, his voice now controlled but menacing. "That alone is grounds for court-martial and imprisonment." Sarah nodded calmly. "Yes, sir. I understand the consequences of my actions, but I also understand the consequences of remaining silent while innocent people are murdered in the name of corporate interests disguised as national security." A young private near the front of the assembly, barely 19 years old, looked confused and frightened. He had joined the military to serve his country honorably, just as his father had done in Vietnam. The idea that his government might be deceiving him about the true nature of their missions was devastating to his worldview. Sergeant Johnson, a veteran of multiple deployments, found himself questioning orders for the first time in his career. He had always trusted that his superiors were acting in the best interests of the nation and its people, but Sarah's words had planted seeds of doubt that were beginning to grow in his mind. "Furthermore," Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger with each word, "the rules of engagement described in that transmission violate the Geneva Convention and international laws of warfare. We swore an oath to defend the Constitution and protect innocent life. How can we honor that oath by participating in what amounts to state-sponsored terrorism?" The general realized that the situation was spiraling out of control. He needed to regain command of the situation before Sarah's words could spread further doubt among the ranks. "Guards!" he shouted. "Arrest Captain Mitchell immediately for insubordination, violation of classified information protocols, and seditious conduct." Military police officers began moving toward Sarah from the edges of the parade ground. She stood her ground, knowing that this moment would determine not only her fate, but possibly the fate of countless innocent civilians halfway around the world. But something unexpected happened. As the military police approached, several soldiers in the assembly began to step forward, placing themselves between Sarah and her would-be captors. First, it was Sergeant Johnson, then Private Williams, then Corporal Davis. Within moments, dozens of soldiers had moved to form a protective barrier around their fellow service member. "Stand down." General Harrison commanded the soldiers who had moved to protect Sarah. "Return to your positions immediately or face charges yourselves." Sergeant Johnson, a decorated veteran with 20 years of service, spoke up for the first time. "Sir, with all due respect, Captain Mitchell has raised serious concerns about the legality and morality of our orders. We have a duty to investigate these claims before proceeding with any mission." The general was furious. His entire command structure was beginning to crumble before his eyes. "Sergeant Johnson, you are relieved of duty pending investigation. Anyone else who supports this mutinous behavior will face similar consequences." But more soldiers continued to step forward. Lieutenant Thompson, who had served 2 tours in Afghanistan, joined the growing group of supporters. "General, we didn't sign up to murder innocent families for oil companies. If Captain Mitchell's information is accurate, then we have a duty to refuse these orders." Captain Rodriguez, a military chaplain, also stepped forward. "Sir, my faith and my conscience compel me to support Captain Mitchell's position. We cannot participate in actions that violate our moral and legal obligations as soldiers and as human beings." The general looked around desperately at his remaining officers, seeking support for his authority. But even among his senior staff, he could see doubt and uncertainty in their expressions. The foundation of unquestioning obedience that had sustained military hierarchies for centuries was beginning to crack. Sarah seized the moment to speak again. "I want everyone here to understand that I love my country and I respect the military. But true patriotism sometimes requires standing up to those in power when they abuse their authority. The men and women standing with me today are not traitors or mutineers. They are patriots who refuse to let their government commit atrocities in their name." News of the confrontation was already spreading beyond the parade ground. Military personnel not present at the assembly were receiving text messages and phone calls from their colleagues, and word was traveling quickly through the base's communication networks. The general knew that he had a limited window of time to control the narrative before the situation became an international incident. "Captain Mitchell," General Harrison said, his voice now dangerously calm, "you have 10 seconds to surrender that recording device and submit to arrest, or I will have you forcibly detained and charged with treason against the United States of America." Sarah held the recording device high above her head, ensuring that everyone could see it. "This recording belongs to the American people, not to any individual or military command. The truth it contains needs to be heard by Congress, by the media, and by every citizen who deserves to know what actions are being taken in their name." The standoff continued as military police surrounded the group of soldiers who had rallied to Sarah's defense. The tension was palpable as hundreds of service members watched history unfold before their eyes. Some remained loyal to the chain of command, while others found themselves questioning everything they had believed about their military service. Colonel Martinez approached the general and whispered urgently in his ear, "Sir, we have reports that several news organizations have already been contacted about this situation. We need to move quickly to contain the damage." General Harrison's mind raced as he realized the full implications of what was happening. This was no longer just a disciplinary matter involving one rebellious officer. This was potentially a scandal that could reach the highest levels of government and military leadership. The recording Sarah possessed could expose a conspiracy that went far beyond their military base. As the confrontation reached its climax, Sarah prepared to make one final statement that would determine the course of events for everyone involved: the fate of Operation Desert Shield. The careers of everyone present, and potentially the lives of innocent families thousands of miles away, all hung in the balance of what happened next. Sarah raised her voice so that every soldier on the parade ground could hear her final words. "I joined the military to protect freedom and defend innocent life. Today, I choose to honor that commitment, even if it costs me everything I have worked for." This recording will be released to the public within the hour, regardless of what happens to me. With those words, she tossed the recording device to Sergeant Johnson, who caught it and immediately passed it to Lieutenant Thompson. The device quickly moved from hand to hand among the soldiers supporting Sarah, making it impossible for the military police to retrieve it without causing a chaotic struggle that would only make the situation worse for the general. General Harrison watched in horror as his authority completely collapsed before his eyes. He realized that any attempt to use force against the growing number of soldiers supporting Sarah would only create more negative publicity and potentially spark a wider rebellion throughout the military ranks. "This is mutiny," he shouted desperately. "Every one of you will face court-martial for this insubordination." But his words carried no weight anymore. Too many soldiers had heard Sarah's accusations and witnessed the general's reaction. His failure to deny the specific claims about targeting civilians had confirmed their worst fears about the true nature of Operation Desert Shield. Captain Rodriguez, the military chaplain, stepped forward with quiet dignity. "General Harrison, perhaps it would be wise to pause this mission pending a full investigation of these allegations. If Captain Mitchell's claims are false, an investigation will clear your name and restore order. If they are true, then we have a moral obligation to prevent a tragedy." The suggestion was reasonable and offered the general a way to save face while avoiding further escalation. But Harrison was too proud and too angry to accept what he saw as surrender to insubordination. "There will be no investigation based on the word of a treasonous officer who violated her oath and compromised classified information." Unknown to the general, several soldiers had been using their cell phones to record the entire confrontation. Video footage of the standoff was already being uploaded to social media platforms and sent to news organizations. The story was spreading beyond the military base faster than anyone could have anticipated. Within 30 minutes of Sarah's initial refusal to salute, major news networks were receiving calls from their Pentagon correspondents who had heard rumors of a significant incident at Fort Henderson. Investigative journalists who specialized in military affairs were already making phone calls to their sources within the Defense Department. As word spread, more soldiers throughout the base began gathering at the parade ground. Many came simply out of curiosity, but others came because they had heard fragments of Sarah's accusations and wanted to learn more. The crowd grew from hundreds to over 1,000 service members, creating an unprecedented assembly that military commanders had never anticipated having to manage. Among the new arrivals was Major Patricia Wells, a military lawyer who specialized in military justice and international law. She had heard about the confrontation through the base's informal communication network and realized immediately that the situation had serious legal implications for everyone involved. Major Wells pushed through the crowd and approached the center of the standoff. "General Harrison, I request permission to address the assembly regarding the legal issues that have been raised here today." The general, desperate for any ally who might help restore order, granted permission without considering that Major Wells might not support his position. She had always been known as a by-the-book officer who followed regulations strictly, so he assumed she would condemn Sarah's actions. "Members of the military," Major Wells began, her voice carrying clearly across the silent assembly. "You all took an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. That oath includes a responsibility to refuse orders that violate the laws of war and international treaties that our nation has signed and ratified." General Harrison's face went pale as he realized that Major Wells was not going to support his position. As a military lawyer, her opinion carried significant weight with the soldiers present, and her words were legitimizing Sarah's actions rather than condemning them. "Under the Uniform Code of Military Justice," Major Wells continued, "soldiers have not only the right, but the obligation to refuse orders that they know to be illegal. The Nuremberg trials after World War II established that following orders is not a defense for war crimes. If Captain Mitchell's allegations are accurate, then refusing to participate in Operation Desert Shield would be the legally and morally correct action." The general interrupted angrily. "Major Wells, you are out of line. You have no authority to provide legal advice that undermines military command decisions." But Major Wells stood her ground. "Sir, with respect, providing accurate legal guidance to service members is exactly my duty as a military lawyer. These soldiers deserve to know their rights and obligations under military law and international treaties." Sarah felt a surge of relief as she realized that she was no longer standing alone. The courage she had shown by refusing to salute had inspired others to find their own courage and speak truth to power. The resistance was no longer about one person's conscience, but about fundamental principles of justice and human decency. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison, who had remained silent throughout the confrontation, finally stepped forward. As the base's second highest-ranking officer, his words would carry enormous weight with the assembled soldiers. "General Harrison, I believe we need to seriously consider the allegations that have been raised today. As military officers, we have a duty to ensure that all operations comply with both U.S. and international law." The general realized that his command was completely undermined. Even his senior officers were now openly questioning his authority and supporting an investigation into Operation Desert Shield. He faced a choice between escalating the confrontation to dangerous levels or accepting that the mission would have to be postponed pending review. At that moment, military police reported that vehicles from several major news organizations had arrived at the base's main gate, demanding access to cover the story. The base's public affairs office was being overwhelmed with calls from reporters around the world who had heard about the confrontation through social media and other sources. Colonel Martinez approached the general with obvious concern. "Sir, we're receiving calls from Pentagon officials demanding an immediate briefing on the situation here. The Secretary of Defense wants a full report within the hour." General Harrison knew that his career was over. The recording that Sarah possessed would eventually surface, regardless of what happened to her. The military's own investigation would reveal the truth about Operation Desert Shield, and his role in planning an operation that violated international law would be exposed. His only remaining option was to try to minimize the damage and hope for some measure of mercy from his superiors. "Stand down," he said quietly to the military police. "Release Captain Mitchell and all personnel supporting her. There will be no arrests today." A cheer went up from the assembled soldiers as they realized that Sarah's courage had prevailed. She had faced down the entire military command structure and won, not through force or rebellion, but through moral courage and a commitment to the truth. In the days that followed, congressional hearings were convened to investigate Operation Desert Shield. Sarah testified before Congress about the intercepted communications and provided evidence of the planned targeting of civilian areas. The operation was permanently canceled, and several high-ranking officials resigned in disgrace. Sarah faced a court-martial for her actions, but public support for her position was overwhelming. Military lawyers volunteered to defend her, arguing that she had fulfilled her highest duty as a soldier by refusing illegal orders. The trial became a landmark case that established important precedents for military personnel faced with similar moral dilemmas. Ultimately, Sarah was acquitted of all charges. The court ruled that her actions were justified under military law and that she had acted with courage and integrity in an impossible situation. She received messages of support from around the world, including from military personnel in other countries who faced similar challenges in their own service. The incident at Fort Henderson became known as a turning point in military culture, establishing that true military honor sometimes requires saying no to those in command. Sarah's refusal to salute became a symbol of moral courage that inspired countless others to stand up for their principles when faced with pressure to compromise their values. Years later, Sarah continued her military service with distinction, eventually rising to the rank of colonel herself. She never forgot the lesson she learned that day on the parade ground, that sometimes the most important word a soldier can say is not, "Yes, sir," but "No, sir." Her courage in that moment of crisis had prevented a tragedy and reminded everyone that true patriotism means holding your country accountable to its highest ideals, even when doing so requires great personal sacrifice.